The rain was relentless, turning souls back alleys into rivers of gray sludge, and in the narrow gap between a shuttered convenience store and a crumbling pension, a small figure huddled beneath a collapsing cardboard box. The little girl had stopped crying hours ago. Crying wasted energy, and energy was something she had very little of. Her stomach was a hollow knot, her lips were cracked, and her thin cotton dress was soaked through, clinging to her ribs like a second skin. She watched the water rush past her torn sneakers and wondered if her mother would come back this time. She had been gone for 3 days now, maybe 4. The little girl had lost count. Across the street, a sleek black Maybach pulled up with the quiet hum of a predator. The car was immaculate, beads of rain sliding off its polished surface like mercury. The man who stepped out was a study in contrasts. Charcoal suit, perfect posture, an expression carved from ice. Kang Seo-jun, CEO of KR Holdings, did not belong in this neighborhood. He was here because one of his major shareholders, an elderly woman with a sentimental streak, had insisted he see the area before the demolition crews moved in. She called it understanding the soul of the city. He called it a waste of his Thursday afternoon. He adjusted his cufflinks and scanned the street with barely concealed distaste. The buildings were tired, their paint peeling like old skin. The gutters overflowed with trash. A stray dog sniffed at an overturned bin. Everything about this place offended his sensibilities. The chaos, the decay, the sheer inefficiency of it all. He was a man who believed in order, in profit margins, in the cold arithmetic of success. He had built his empire on those principles, crushing competitors and devouring smaller companies without a second thought. He did not feel guilt. He did not feel nostalgia. He felt nothing at all. Then the wind caught his umbrella, yanking it sideways and sending a spray of water directly into his face. He cursed under his breath, stepping back under the awning of the convenience store to wait for the rain to ease. His driver, Mr. Park, had already pulled the car around the corner to find a spot where the flooding wasn't so bad. Seo-jun stood there, annoyed, checking his watch, mentally recalculating his schedule. And that was when he heard it, a small, trembling voice, barely audible over the drumming rain. "Sir, can I stay with you today?" He turned. His eyes adjusted to the dim light between the buildings, and he saw her. A child, no older than 7 or 8, huddled in a pile of soaked cardboard. Her face was pale, her dark hair matted to her head, her eyes too large for her bony face. She was looking at him with a mixture of fear and desperate hope, like a wounded animal too exhausted to run. For a long moment, he said nothing. He stared at her, and she stared back. His first instinct was to dismiss her, to walk away, to call security and have her removed. This was not his problem. He had no obligation to the street urchins of this city. But something held him in place, the raw, unguarded quality of her question. She was not begging for money. She was not demanding food. She was asking if she could stay, as if he were a shelter, as if he were safe. He opened his mouth to speak, to deliver the cold dismissal that came so naturally to him. But no words came out. His throat closed up, and the walls he had spent decades building began to crack. He remembered being 10 years old, locked in the garden shed by his own father because he had failed a math test. He remembered the dark, the cold, the smell of damp earth and old tools. He remembered pressing his face against the cracks in the wooden door, watching the lights flicker in the house where his family sat together, eating dinner without him. He remembered the silence. He remembered the loneliness. He remembered making a promise to himself that night, that he would never be weak again, that he would never need anyone, that he would become so powerful, so untouchable, that no one would ever be able to hurt him. And here, in this rain-soaked alley, he saw himself, not as the man he had become, but as the boy he had buried. The little girl's question had reached into the deepest, most guarded part of him and pulled out that boy, shivering and forgotten. The scene burst into tears. It was not a gentle, dignified weep. It was an ugly, wrenching sob that seemed to come from somewhere primal. He dropped the umbrella. He didn't feel the rain soaking his hair, his suit, his skin. He fell to his knees on the wet pavement, the mud seeping through his expensive trousers, and he wept like a man whose soul had been hollowed out. The little girl recoiled in confusion. She had expected him to ignore her, maybe shoo her away. She had not expected this. This powerful, polished man, kneeling in the dirt, crying so hard his shoulders shook. It scared her more than his cold expression ever could. "Please don't cry," she whispered, her own voice trembling. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you sad." He looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed and raw, and he shook his head. "No," he said, his voice hoarse and broken. "You didn't do anything wrong." He took a shuddering breath, trying to compose himself, but the tears kept coming. "What's your name?" "Yuna," she said softly. "Kim Yuna." "Yuna," he repeated, the name foreign and fragile on his tongue. "Where are your parents?" She looked down at her hands, her small fingers picking at the frayed edge of her dress. "My mother left," she said. "She said she would be back in a few hours. But that was 3 days ago. I don't know where she went." She paused, then added, so quietly he almost didn't hear it, "I don't think she's coming back." The words hit him like a physical blow. He knew that feeling, that certainty of abandonment. He had felt it in his bones as a child, waiting for his father to open the shed door, knowing he never would. He reached out, his hand trembling, and placed it gently on her shoulder. She flinched at the contact, but didn't pull away. "You're hungry," he said. It wasn't a question as she nodded, her eyes filling with tears she refused to shed. "A little," she admitted. He rose to his feet, his knees aching from the cold, and extended his hand to her. "Come with me," he said. "I'll take you somewhere warm." She stared at his hand, hesitant, suspicious. She had been taught not to trust strangers, especially rich ones. But the rain was cold, her stomach was empty, and there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something genuine, something almost human, that made her want to believe him. She took his hand and he pulled her gently to her feet, then wrapped his suit jacket around her shoulders. It was large on her, the sleeves trailing past her fingertips, but it was warm and dry and smelled of expensive cologne. She clutched it like a lifeline. They stood there for a moment, a bizarre tableau. The billionaire and the beggar child, soaked and shivering, connected by something neither of them fully understood. The rain began to ease, the clouds thinning to reveal a pale, watery sun. Seo-jun looked down at the small girl beside him, her hand still clasped in his, and felt something shift inside him. A crack in the armor he had worn for 30 years. "I can't promise you anything," he said, his voice still rough from crying. "But I promise you this, you won't be alone today, and we'll figure out the rest." Yuna looked up at him, her dark eyes searching his face. She didn't understand why this man had broken down in front of her. She didn't understand why he was being kind. But for the first time in 3 days, she felt a tiny spark of something she had thought was gone forever: hope. He led her to the car, just as Mr. Park pulled around the corner, his face a mask of professional discretion. He didn't ask questions. He simply opened the back door and helped Yuna inside, settling her onto the leather seat as if she were a visiting dignitary. Seo-jun slid in beside her, and for a long moment, they drove in silence. The car's interior was hushed, the rain muted by the soundproofing, the soft hum of the engine the only sound. Yuna pressed her face to the window, watching the buildings slide past, her breath fogging the glass. "Where are we going?" she asked finally. "To my home," he said, surprising himself. He had intended to take her to a shelter, to a hospital, anywhere but his own private sanctuary. But the words had come out before he could stop them. Yuna looked at him, her expression unreadable. Why he didn't have an answer. He didn't know why he was doing this. He didn't know why he had cried, or why he had knelt in the mud, or why he was taking this dirty, hungry child to his penthouse. All he knew was that something had broken inside him, and he didn't want to fix it. "I don't know," he admitted. I can't leave you alone. Not today." She nodded slowly, accepting his answer with a child's simple trust. Then she leaned her head against the window and closed her eyes, her small body finally relaxing. For the first time in days, she felt like she could rest. Seo-jun watched her sleep, her face peaceful in the soft glow of the car's interior lights. His mind raced with questions. What was he going to do with her? Where were her relatives? Was she even safe to have in his home? But for once, he pushed those thoughts aside. He was exhausted, emotionally spent, and he didn't have the energy for his usual calculations. The car pulled up to his building, a towering glass monolith that pierced the sky. Mr. Park opened the door, and Seo-jun gently shook Yuna awake. She blinked, disoriented, then looked up at the building with wide eyes. "This is where you live," she whispered. "Odd." "Yes," he said. "Come on." Let's get you dry. He led her through the marble lobby, past the startled doorman, into the private elevator that opened directly into his penthouse. The apartment was minimalist, all clean lines and muted colors, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. Yuna stood in the middle of the living room, dripping water onto the pristine white rug, and looked around and wondered, "It's so big," she breathed. "And quiet." Seo-jun watched her take in his world, and he saw it through her eyes for the first time. Cold, sterile, empty. It was a museum, not a home. And he had spent years convincing himself that was exactly what he wanted. He showed her to the guest bathroom, laid out a towel and a fresh set of pajamas he kept for visiting nephews he never saw. He told her to take a hot bath, to warm up, to take her time. She nodded, clutching the towel to her chest, and gave him a small, tentative smile. "Thank you," she said, her voice small but sincere. He nodded, unable to speak, and closed the door behind him. He went to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and sat at the island staring at nothing. His hands were still shaking. His chest ached with an emotion he couldn't name. The little girl's words echoed in his mind. "Sir, can I stay with you today?" And he felt the tears threaten again. He had built his life on isolation, on the belief that connections were liabilities, that caring for others was a weakness. And in one moment, a single question from a child had shattered all of that. He heard the bathroom door open, and a moment later, Yuna padded into the kitchen in the two large pajamas, her hair damp and curling around her face. She looked clean, warm, and utterly out of place in his sterile, expensive world. She climbed onto the stool beside him and looked at his glass of whiskey with curiosity. "Is that juice?" He almost laughed. "No," he said. "It's for adults." She nodded sagely. "My mother used to drink something like that. It made her sad." He set the glass down, suddenly ashamed. "It does that," he admitted. Yuna was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over and placed her small hand on his arm. "You don't have to be sad," she said earnestly. "I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." He looked at her, this tiny, brave child who had no reason to trust him, no reason to offer comfort, and felt the last of his walls crumble. He pulled her into a gentle hug, careful not to squeeze too hard, and buried his face in her damp hair. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." She didn't ask what for. She just hugged him back, her small arms wrapping around his neck. And in that moment, surrounded by glass and steel and the fading echoes of rain, Kang Seo-jun began to understand what it meant to be human again. Yuna fell asleep on the leather couch in his living room before he could figure out what to do with her. One minute she was sitting there, wrapped in a blanket that cost more than most people's monthly rent, her small hands cupped around a mug of warm milk she had barely touched. The next minute, her head was lolling to the side, her eyes fluttering shut, her breathing evening out into the soft, rhythmic pattern of deep exhaustion. She looked impossibly small against the dark expanse of the couch, a fragile speck in a room designed for a man who had no use for fragility. Kang Seo-jun stood over her, his arms crossed, his jaw tight, and tried to remember the last time he had been this uncertain about anything. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals, dismantled rival companies, faced down shareholders with the cold precision of a surgeon. He had never once second-guessed himself. But now, staring at this sleeping child, his mind was a tangled mess of questions he couldn't answer and emotions he couldn't name. What was he supposed to do with her? He couldn't keep her here. That was absurd. He was a bachelor, a workaholic, a man whose life revolved around board meetings and quarterly reports. He didn't know how to care for a plant, let alone a child. She needed a home, a family, stability. She needed social services, a foster placement, someone who actually knew what they were doing. She didn't need a cold, broken man who had spent 30 years learning how not to feel. And yet he couldn't bring himself to call anyone. He couldn't pick up the phone and ask for a social worker to come take her away. The thought of her being placed in some sterile institution, shuffled from one temporary home to another, made something twist painfully in his chest. He knew that world. He had grown up in that world, after his father had finally gotten tired of him and sent him to a boarding school where the other boys had mocked his threadbare clothes and the teachers had looked through him like he was made of glass. He had promised himself he would never be helpless again, never be at the mercy of other people's charity. And now here he was, looking at a child who was precisely that, helpless, dependent, at the mercy of a stranger who had no idea what he was doing. He crouched down beside the couch, his elbows resting on his knees, and studied her face in the dim light. She was pale, her cheekbones too sharp, her wrists too thin. There were faint bruises on her arms, old ones, yellow and fading, that she hadn't mentioned and he hadn't asked about. Her lips were cracked, her nails bitten to the quick. She was a walking catalog of neglect, and yet she had asked him, a complete stranger, if she could stay with him. Not for money, not for food, just for company. He reached out, hesitating, then brushed a strand of damp hair from her forehead. She stirred slightly, murmuring something in her sleep, but didn't wake. He pulled his hand back as if he had been burned. "Mr. Park," he said into his phone, his voice low. "I need you to find out everything you can about Kim Yuna. She's about 7 or 8. Her mother left her in a back alley in the Namdaemun district. Check hospitals, shelters, police records. I want to know what happened to her. And I want to know if there's any family who might be looking for her." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Mr. Park's measured voice. "Sir, if I may ask, are you planning to keep her there tonight?" "Yes," Seojun said, the word coming out harsher than he intended. "Is that a problem?" "No, sir. I'll get you the information as soon as possible." Seojun ended the call and stood up, running a hand through his hair. He felt unmoored, adrift in a way he hadn't felt since he was a teenager, standing in the rain outside his father's funeral, feeling nothing but a hollow emptiness where grief should have been. He had spent years building his fortress, and in one afternoon, a child with big eyes and a desperate question had breached every wall. He went to his home office, a sleek room filled with monitors and documents, and sat down at his desk. He tried to focus on the quarterly reports, the acquisition proposals, the endless stream of data that usually consumed his attention. But the numbers blurred in front of him, and all he could see was Yuna's face, her small hand reaching for his. He thought about the mother. Where was she? Was she dead? Was she in a hospital somewhere, unable to come back, or had she simply abandoned her daughter, left her to fend for herself in the streets? He had seen that kind of cruelty before, had lived through it himself. The thought of it made his blood run cold. A few hours later, the first rays of dawn were breaking over the city, painting the glass towers in shades of gold and pink. Seojun hadn't slept. He had paced, read reports, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and then poured it down the sink. He was standing at the window, watching the city stir to life, when he heard a soft shuffling sound behind him. He turned. Yuna was standing in the doorway of the living room, rubbing her eyes, her hair a wild mess of tangles. She looked confused, disoriented, like she wasn't sure where she was. Then her gaze found him, and her face relaxed into a tentative smile. "Good morning," she said, her voice still thick with sleep. "Good morning," he replied, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. He couldn't remember the last time he had exchanged that greeting with anyone. She padded over to him, still wrapped in the blanket, and stood beside him at the window. She pressed her nose against the glass, leaving a smudge, and looked down at the tiny cars moving like ants on the streets below. "It's so high," she breathed. "You can see everything from here." "Yes," he said. "That's the idea." She turned to look at him, her expression serious. "Are you going to send me away now?" The question hit him like a punch to the gut. He opened his mouth to say yes, to explain that he had to, that it was what was best for her, that he wasn't equipped to take care of her. But the words wouldn't come. He looked at her small, hopeful face, and he couldn't bring himself to crush that hope. "No," he heard himself say. "Not yet." Her smile widened, bright and genuine, and for a moment, it was like the sun had broken through the clouds. She reached up and took his hand, her fingers cold and small in his palm. "Can I have breakfast?" she asked. "I'm really hungry." He realized with a start that he had no food in his kitchen. He ate out. He ordered in. His refrigerator was a desolate wasteland of condiments and expired takeout. He had never needed to cook for anyone, never wanted to. "I'll take you out," he said. "Is there anything you like?" She thought about it seriously, her brow furrowed. "Rice," she said finally. "And soup. My mother used to make me soup. With vegetables." It was warm. His chest tightened, but he nodded. "We'll find you soup." He dressed quickly, choosing a simple black suit, his uniform, his armor, and helped Yuna into a clean outfit from the guest closet. It was too big for her, a plain white shirt that hung past her knees, but it was dry and clean, and she didn't complain. He realized he would need to buy her proper clothes. He would need to buy her a lot of things. The thought was overwhelming, but also, unexpectedly, not unwelcomed, they took the elevator down to the lobby, drawing stares from the staff. The doorman, the concierge, the security guard, they all looked at the CEO with his tiny, mismatched companion, and their faces betrayed a carefully suppressed curiosity. Seo Jun ignored them. He was used to being stared at, but for the first time, he felt a flicker of self-consciousness. What must they think of him? The cold-hearted tycoon, suddenly playing babysitter to a dirty street child. He took her to a small restaurant in the basement of a nearby building, a place he had never noticed before. It was humble, with plastic tables and faded posters on the walls, and the smell of soup and rice filled the air. The old woman who ran the place looked up in surprise when he walked in, clearly not expecting a man in a $1,000 suit to darken her doorway. 2 bowls of vegetable soup, he said. And rice. The woman nodded, her eyes flicking from him to Yuna, and then she busied herself in the kitchen. Yuna climbed onto a plastic chair, her feet dangling, and looked around with quiet wonder. It smells like home, she said softly. Thijun sat down across from her, feeling utterly out of place. The chair was too small, the table too close to his knees, and the steam from the kitchen fogged his glasses. He took them off and polished them with his handkerchief, a nervous habit he had tried to break for years. The soup arrived in 2 large bowls, steaming and fragrant, filled with vegetables and tofu and a rich, savory broth. Yuna picked up her spoon and dug in with an enthusiasm that made his heart ache. She ate like she hadn't seen food in weeks, and for all he knew, she hadn't. She finished her bowl in minutes, then looked up at him with expectant eyes. "Can I have more?" she asked. He motioned to the old woman for another bowl, and they sat in silence while Yuna ate her second serving. He didn't touch his own soup. He wasn't hungry. He was too busy watching her, cataloging every detail. The way her cheeks flushed with warmth, the way she savored each spoonful, the way her tiny shoulders relaxed as the hunger faded from her eyes. When she was done, she set down her spoon and leaned back with a satisfied sigh. "Thank you," she said. "That was the best soup I've ever had." He nodded, not trusting his voice. That on the walk back to his building, he took her hand again. It felt natural now, a small anchor connecting him to something he had thought he'd lost forever. She chattered as they walked, pointing at birds, at a stray cat, at a colorful shop sign that caught her eye. She asked him questions. What was his favorite color? Did he have any pets? Had he ever been to the ocean? And he answered them all, his voice stilted but not unkind. When they reached the lobby, his phone buzzed. He checked the screen. It was Mr. Park. "I have the information you requested, sir," Mr. Park said. "It's not good." Seo Jun's grip on Yuna's hand tightened slightly. He led her to a quiet corner of the lobby and sat her down on a bench. "To stay here," he said. "I'll be right back." He stepped away, his back to her, and raised the phone to his ear. "Go ahead." Mr. Park's voice was measured, careful. "Kim Yuna's mother, a woman named Kim Mi-suk, was arrested 3 days ago. Drug possession, sir. She was high when they picked her up. She's currently in custody, and she's not saying much. Social Services has no record of Yuna. She wasn't registered in any school. It looks like her mother was keeping her off the grid." Seo Jun's jaw tightened. Any relatives, grandparents, a father, her mother's family disowned her years ago. They don't want anything to do with her or the child. The father's name isn't on the birth certificate. No one's been looking for her, sir. As far as the system is concerned, she doesn't exist. He closed his eyes, the weight of those words pressing down on him. She doesn't exist. That was exactly how he had felt as a child, invisible, unwanted, a ghost in his own family. The parallel was too sharp, too painful. "What are my options?" he asked, his voice barely above a whispered. "Frankly, sir, you could hand her over to the authorities. They'll place her in a temporary shelter, and then she'll likely go into the foster system. But with no documentation, no family, it could take months before she finds a permanent placement. And even then..." Mr. Park trailed off, unwilling to say the words aloud. Seo Jun knew what he meant. The system was broken. Children like Yuna fell through the cracks, bounced from one indifferent home to another, grew up angry and alone. He had seen it firsthand. He had lived it. He turned back to look at Yuna, still sitting on the bench, her legs swinging, her eyes on the door, watching for him. She looked small and hopeful and so utterly vulnerable. And in that moment, he made a decision that would change everything. "I'll do it myself," he said. "I'll take guardianship. Get me the paperwork." Mr. Park was silent for a long moment. "Sir, are you sure this is a major commitment? You're not exactly the most paternal figure." "I know what I am," Seojun snapped. "Just get me the paperwork." He ended the call and walked back to Yuna. She looked up at him, her expression anxious, sensing that something had shifted. "Is everything okay?" she asked. He crouched down in front of her, bringing himself to her level. He looked into her dark, trusting eyes, and he felt the last of his resistance crumbled. "Yuna," he said, "how would you like to stay with me for real? Not just today, for a long time." She blinked, processing his words. "Like, live with you?" "Yes," he said. "Like that." For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Her eyes searched his face, looking for the catch, the lie, the trick. Then slowly, hesitantly, she smiled. "Okay," she said. "I'd like that." He reached out and took her hand, and this time, he didn't let go to the reality of what he had done hit Kang Seojun the moment the social worker's car pulled away from his building. He stood in the marble lobby, watching the taillights disappear around the corner, and felt a cold dread settle into his bones. He had just signed papers, legal documents, a temporary guardianship agreement that made him responsible for a 7-year-old child he had known for less than 24 hours. The social worker had been polite but skeptical, her eyes flicking between him and Yuna with barely concealed disbelief. She had asked him questions he couldn't fully answer. Why did he want to do this? Where was the mother? Did he have any experience with children? He had answered with his usual cold efficiency, but he could tell she didn't buy it. She had left with a folder full of paperwork and a promise to check in next week. And now he was alone in his pristine, silent penthouse with a child who was staring at him like he was a puzzle she couldn't solve. That Yuna had been quiet since the social worker left. She sat on the edge of the leather couch, her small hands folded in her lap, her feet not quite touching the floor. She had changed into the 2 large clothes he had given her, and she looked like a doll abandoned in a house that was too big for her. She was watching him with those dark, wary eyes, the same eyes that had asked him if she could stay. But now there was something else there. Uncertainty. Fear. As if she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Seojun stood by the window, his back to her, trying to collect himself. He was a man who had built an empire on control, on precision, on never showing weakness. And yet, in the span of a single day, he had wept in front of a child, taken her into his home, and signed away his autonomy to a government agency. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know how to be a father. He didn't even know how to be a decent human being. That the silence between them stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. He could feel her gaze on his back, waiting for him to speak, to explain, to do something. But his mind was blank. He had no script for this. No strategy. No plan. Finally, she broke the silence. "Are you mad at me?" The question was so small, so tentative, that it cut through him like a blade. He turned around, his expression softening despite himself. "No," he said. "I'm not mad." "Then why are you standing so far away?" He blinked, caught off guard by the simple logic of her question. He took a step toward her, then another, until he was standing in front of her. He looked down at her small, upturned face, and he felt the weight of his own inadequacy pressing down on his shoulders. "I'm not used to this," he admitted. "I don't know how to take care of someone." She tilted her head, considering his words. "It's not that hard," she said. "My mother used to take care of me. She didn't know what she was doing either. But she tried." The mention of her mother made his jaw tighten. He still hadn't told her. He didn't know how. How did you tell a 7-year-old that her mother had been arrested, that she was in custody, that she wouldn't be coming back anytime soon? He had asked Mr. Park to look into the possibility of a bail hearing, but the charges were serious. Drug possession, intent to distribute. She was looking at years, not months. And the truth was, even if she got out, she had abandoned her daughter. She had left her in a back alley with nothing but a cardboard box for shelter. She didn't deserve to have Yuna back. But that wasn't his decision to make. Not yet. He had to tell Yuna the truth. She had a right to know. "Yuna," he said slowly, crouching down in front of her. "There's something I need to tell you." She looked at him, her eyes suddenly wary. "Is it about my mother?" "How did you know?" She shrugged. A small, sad gesture that made him want to pull her into his arms and never let go. She always did things that got her in trouble, she said. She would leave for a few days and come back with bruises, or she would be really happy and then really sad. Sometimes the police came to our door. I learned to hide. Seo Jun's heart clenched. He had been right. She knew. She had seen things no child should ever see, and she had learned to read the signs, to protect herself, to survive. She was so young, and yet she had already developed the instincts of a soldier. Your mother was arrested, he said gently. She's in jail right now. I don't know when she'll be able to come back. Yuna was quiet for a long moment. She stared at her hands, her small fingers twisting the fabric of her shirt. When she looked up, her eyes were dry. Is she okay? I don't know, he admitted. But I have people looking into it. I'll find out. She nodded slowly, processing the information. Then she said, Are you going to send me to an orphanage now? The question hit him like a physical blow. No, he said, his voice rough. That's not going to happen. But you said you didn't know how to take care of me. I'll learn. She looked at him, her gaze searching his face, and then she did something that surprised him. She reached out and put her small hand on his cheek. Her palm was cool against his skin, her fingers delicate and fragile. You're a good person, she said. I can tell. He didn't know what to say to that. He had been called many things in his life: ruthless, cold, brilliant, calculating. No one had ever called him good. He wasn't sure he deserved it. But looking into her trusting eyes, he made a silent vow. He would learn. He would figure this out. He would not let her down. That evening, Seo Jun realized he had no idea how to feed a child. He stared at the contents of his refrigerator, a half-empty bottle of wine, a container of gourmet kimchi he had forgotten about, and a suspiciously old block of cheese, and felt a wave of helplessness wash over him. What did children eat? He had never thought about it. He had never needed to. Yuna appeared in the kitchen doorway, her small silhouette framed against the soft light of the hallway. What's for dinner? She asked. He turned to her, his expression carefully neutral. I was just figuring that out. What do you like to eat? She tilted her head, thinking. My mother used to make ramyun sometimes, with an egg on top. It was my favorite. Ramyun. He could do that. He pulled out his phone and ordered groceries, instant noodles, eggs, vegetables, milk, cereal, things he thought a child might eat. The delivery arrived within the hour, and he stood in the kitchen, an apron tied around his waist, trying to figure out how to boil water without burning it. Yuna watched him from the counter, her legs swinging, a small smile playing on her lips. You're not very good at this, she observed. I've never had to do it before, he admitted, not taking his eyes off the pot. She slid off the stool and came to stand beside him. I can help, she said. My mother taught me how to crack an egg. He looked down at her, his expression skeptical. You're 7. 6, she corrected. But I'm mature for my age. He snorted, a sound so unexpected that he almost startled himself. It was the first time he had laughed in. He couldn't remember how long. Fine, he said, handing her an egg. Show me. She took the egg with the seriousness of a surgeon, tapping it gently against the edge of the bowl, cracking it open with surprising precision. She dropped the yolk into the pot, then turned to him with a triumphant grin. See, she said. Easy. He shook his head, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It was a small moment, insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But it was also the first moment of normalcy he had felt in years. He was standing in his kitchen, cooking ramyun with a 6-year-old girl, and he wasn't thinking about quarterly reports or acquisition strategies or the cold arithmetic of profit margins. He was just there. They ate at the kitchen island, 2 bowls of steaming noodles, the silence between them comfortable and easy. Yuna ate with an enthusiasm that bordered on ferocity, her small face buried in the bowl. When she was done, she leaned back with a satisfied sigh. You're not bad at this, she said. For a beginner. He raised an eyebrow. High praise. She grinned, and for a moment, he saw a flash of the child she could have been, the child she should have been, if the world hadn't been so cruel to her. He wanted to give her that. He wanted to give her a childhood, a chance to be carefree and happy and safe. He didn't know how to do it, but he was determined to try. Later that night, after he had shown her to the guest room and tucked her into the too large bed, he stood in the doorway and watched her sleep. She was curled on her side, her small hand clutching the corner of the pillow, her face peaceful and relaxed. He thought about the future, about all the things he would need to do: enroll her in school, find her clothes, figure out a routine that worked for both of them. It was overwhelming, but it was also, unexpectedly, exciting. He turned off the light and closed the door, then went to his study. He had calls to make, plans to put in motion. He wasn't going to do this halfway. If he was going to be a guardian, he was going to be the best guardian he could be. He had resources, connections, influence. He was going to use all of them to make sure Yuna never felt alone again. But as he sat down at his desk and pulled out his phone, a thought nagged at the back of his mind. His father had been a wealthy man too. He had had resources, connections, influence, and he had used them to make Seojun's life a living hell. Money hadn't made his father a good parent. It hadn't even made him a decent one. Seojun leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He had promised himself he wouldn't be like his father. He had built his life on that promise, on the determination to be independent, self-sufficient, untouchable. But now he was responsible for a child. He couldn't afford to be cold. He couldn't afford to be distant. He had to be more than his father ever was. The question was whether he even knew how. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat at his desk, making lists, researching schools, looking up child psychologists. He sent emails to his lawyers, his assistants, his contacts in the education system. He was a man of action, and action was what he did best. But beneath the efficiency, beneath the carefully constructed plans, there was a simmering fear. What if he failed her? What if he wasn't enough? He pushed the thought aside. He didn't have the luxury of doubt. Yuna was counting on him. He would figure it out. He had to. The next morning, he woke her early. She was groggy and irritable, her hair sticking up in all directions, but she followed him to the bathroom and brushed her teeth without complaint. He had bought her a new toothbrush, pink and sparkly, and she had looked at it like it was a treasured. "I've never had a new toothbrush before," she said. Her voice smalled, the words lodged in his chest like a splinter. He didn't say anything. He just nodded and showed her how to use it. They had breakfast at the same restaurant as before, and this time, the old woman gave him a knowing smile. "Your daughter?" she asked. He opened his mouth to correct her, but Yuna beat him to it. "Yes," she said firmly. "He's my dad." Seojun froze. He didn't know what to say. He wasn't her dad. He was barely a guardian. But the way she said it, so matter-of-fact, so certain, made his heart swell in a way he hadn't expected. He nodded slowly, meeting her eyes. "Yes," he said. "She's my daughter." The old woman smiled and brought them another bowl of soup, free of charge. Yuna beamed at him, and he realized, with a jolt of surprise, that he was beaming back. It was a small thing, a tiny moment of connection, but it was also a beginning. He didn't know where this path would lead. He didn't know if he would succeed. But for the first time in his life, Kang Seojun was ready to try. The first week was a war of attrition fought in small, quiet battles. Kang Seojun had built a corporate empire by crushing opposition, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for the stubborn, silent resistance of a 6-year-old girl who refused to eat vegetables. She would push them around her plate with the tip of her spoon, her small face set in a mask of determination, and no amount of reasoning or bribery could convince her to take a single bite. He tried everything, cutting them into shapes, hiding them in soup, even offering her ice cream as a reward. She would look at him with those dark, patient eyes and say, "I don't like them. They taste like dirt." And then she would sit there, her arms crossed, waiting for him to give up. He didn't give up. He was Kang Seojun. He had never given up on anything in his life. But he was also learning, slowly and painfully, that children were not adversaries to be defeated. They were not business rivals or hostile shareholders. They were fragile, complicated, and utterly illogical. And the more he tried to impose order on Yuna's world, the more she seemed to retreat into herself. It wasn't just the vegetables. It was everything. She would flinch when he raised his voice, even slightly. She would freeze when he moved too quickly. She would stare at him with a wary, calculating look that made him feel like a monster. He knew, intellectually, that these were signs of trauma, the scars left by years of neglect and instability. But knowing didn't make it easier. It just made him angrier, not at her, but at the world that had done this to her, at the mother who had abandoned her, at the system that had failed her, at himself for not knowing how to fix it. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon, 7 days after he had brought her home. He had taken her to a child psychologist, a woman named Dr. Han who specialized in trauma and attachment disorders. The session had been a disaster. Yuna had refused to speak, sitting in a corner of the office with her knees pulled to her chest, her face buried in her arms. She had ignored Dr. Han's gentle questions, her soothing voice, her careful attempts to build trust. When Seo-jun had tried to intervene, she had looked at him with an expression that cut through him like a knife. "You're going to leave me too," she had said. "Everyone does." He had tried to reassure her, but his words had felt hollow, inadequate. He was a man who could negotiate billion-dollar deals in his sleep, but he couldn't convince a 6-year-old girl that she was safe. The session had ended early, and he had driven her home in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. And now they were in the penthouse, and Yuna was sitting on the floor of her room, her back against the bed, staring at nothing. He stood in the doorway, watching her, his heart heavy with a frustration he couldn't name. He wanted to help her. He wanted to reach her. But every door he tried to open seemed to slam shut in his face. "Yuna," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "Dr. Han is trying to help you. You have to talk to her." She didn't respond. She didn't even blink. "I know this is hard," he continued, stepping into the room. "But you can't keep shutting people out. I'm not going to leave you. I told you that." Still nothing. She sat there like a doll, her eyes glassy and unseeing. He crouched down in front of her, his hands on his knees, trying to catch her gaze. "Please," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Talk to me." She looked up at him then, and he saw something in her eyes that made his blood run cold. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was resignation, a bone-deep exhaustion that seemed far beyond her years. She had been fighting for so long, and she had nothing left. "You don't have to pretend," she said quietly. "I know you don't want me here. I'm just another problem you have to fix. Another obligation." The words hit him like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to deny it, to tell her she was wrong, but the words wouldn't come. Because a part of him, the cold, calculating part that had kept him alive for so many years, had been thinking exactly that. She was an obligation, a responsibility he hadn't asked for, a complication in a life that had been carefully, meticulously ordered. But that wasn't the whole truth. It wasn't even most of the truth. The truth was that she had broken something inside him, and he didn't know how to put it back together. The truth was that he cared about her more than he had cared about anything in years. And that terrified him. "You're wrong," he said finally, his voice rough. "You're not just an obligation. You're not a problem to be fixed. You're—" He trailed off, struggling to find the words. "You're the first person in a very long time who has made me feel anything at all." She stared at him, her expression shifting from resignation to confusion. "What does that mean?" He sat down on the floor beside her, his back against the bed, his legs stretched out in front of him. He was wearing his usual charcoal suit, and he knew he was going to ruin it, but he didn't care. He was too tired to care about anything except making her understand. "It means that before you, I didn't feel much of anything. I was just going through the motions. Work, meetings, deals. That was my life, and I was good at it. But I wasn't happy. I wasn't sad. I was just empty." He paused, staring at the ceiling. "And then you came along, and you asked if you could stay with me. And for the first time in 30 years, I felt something. I don't know if it was hope or fear or love or all three, but it was real, and it scared me." She was quiet for a long moment, processing his words. Then she said, "You think I'm scary?" He let out a short, surprised laugh. "Terrifying," he said. "You're the scariest thing that's ever happened to me." She didn't laugh. She just looked at him, her eyes searching his face, and then she said, "My mother used to say that I was too much, that I asked too many questions, that I needed too much attention. She said I made her tired." His chest tightened. "Your mother was wrong," he said, his voice hard. "You're not too much. You're exactly the right amount. And if you need attention, I'll give it to you. If you have questions, I'll answer them. That's what I'm here for." She looked down at her hands, her small fingers twisting in her lap. "You promise?" "I promise," he said. She was quiet for another long moment, and then she leaned over and rested her head against his shoulder. It was a small gesture, barely a touch, but it felt like a victory. He put his arm around her, pulling her close, and they sat there in silence, watching the shadows lengthen across the floor. "You know," she said after a while, "you're not very good at being a dad." He raised an eyebrow. "I'm aware. But you're trying," she continued. "That's what counts." He looked down at her, at the crown of her head, the soft strands of hair that smelled like the strawberry shampoo he had bought for her. He felt a warmth spread through his chest, something he had thought he was incapable of. I'll keep trying, he said. I'll keep trying until I get it right. She nodded, burrowing deeper into his side. Okay, she said. I'll be patient. That evening, they ordered pizza. It wasn't healthy, and he knew he should have insisted on something more nutritious, but he didn't care. He sat across from her at the kitchen island, watching her eat with the same ferocious enthusiasm she had shown on their first day together, and he felt something shift inside him. He wasn't just going through the motions anymore. He was living. For the first time in years, he was actually living. The next day, he took her to a department store to buy clothes. It was a logistical nightmare. She didn't want anything he picked out. She didn't want the pink dresses or the frilly skirts or the sparkly shoes. She wanted a plain white t-shirt and a pair of jeans that were too big for her. She wanted practical, comfortable, unremarkable clothes. Clothes that would make her blend in, disappear, avoid attention. Why don't you want anything nice? He asked, frustration creeping into his voice. She looked up at him with those serious eyes. Nice things get taken away, she said. If I don't have anything nice, I won't miss it when it's gone. He knelt down in front of her, his hands on her shoulders, forcing her to meet his gaze. Listen to me, he said. Nothing is going to be taken away from you. Not ever. You're going to have nice things. You're going to have so many nice things that you won't know what to do with them all. And they're going to stay right where they belong. Do you understand? She stared at him, her lower lip trembling slightly. You don't know that, she whispered. You can't promise that. I can, he said firmly. And I do. I promise you, Yuna. No one is going to take anything away from you. Not anymore. She was silent for a long moment, and then she threw her arms around his neck, hugging him so tightly that he could barely breathe. He held her, his eyes closed, feeling the small, fragile weight of her in his arms, and he made another silent vow. He would protect her. He would give her everything she had never had. He would make sure she knew, deep in her bones, that she was safe. They left the store with an armload of bags, pink dresses and frilly skirts and sparkly shoes. She had insisted on a few plain t-shirts too, but she had also let him buy her a stuffed bunny, soft and white, with floppy ears and a little pink nose. She hugged it to her chest as they walked to the car, her face bright with a tentative smile. Thank you, she said softly. He looked down at her, at the small, brave girl who had asked if she could stay, and he smiled. Anytime, he said. And he meant it. That night, he tucked her into bed, the stuffed bunny tucked under her arm. She was drowsy, her eyes half closed, her voice soft with sleep. Sujin SSI. She murmured, yes, thank you for not giving up on me. He leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. I'll never give up on you, he said. I promise. She smiled, a small, sleepy smile, and closed her eyes. He stood there for a long moment, watching her breathe, and then he turned off the light and closed the door. He didn't go to his study. He didn't check his emails or review the quarterly reports. He sat on the couch in the living room, staring at the city lights, and he let himself feel the fear, the hope, the love, all of it. For the first time in his life, Kang Seojun was exactly where he needed to be. 2 months into his new life as a guardian, Kang Seojun received a phone call that shattered the fragile peace he had built. He was in his office at KR Holdings, surrounded by the familiar trappings of his empire, the sleek desk, the wall of monitors, the panoramic view of the city he had conquered. Yuna was at school, her first day at a private elementary school he had spent weeks researching. He had been nervous dropping her off, more nervous than he had been at any board meeting in his career. She had looked so small in her new uniform, her hair neatly brushed, her backpack almost as big as she was. She had given him a brave smile and a wave, and he had stood there like a fool, watching until she disappeared through the doors. Now he was trying to focus on a merger proposal, but his mind kept drifting to her. Was she making friends? Was she eating her lunch? Was she scared? He had called the school 3 times already, and the secretary had started to sound annoyed. He didn't care. He was learning that worry was a constant companion, a low hum of anxiety that never quite went away. His phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at the screen. It was Mr. Park. Sir, Mr. Park said, his voice carefully neutral. We have a situation. Yuna's mother has been released on bail. Seojun's blood ran cold. What? A judge granted her release pending trial. She's out, and she's asking to see her daughter. He gripped the phone so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Where is she? She's at the station, Mr. Park said. She's been asking questions about where Yuna is. Someone must have told her about the guardianship. She's demanding to see her. Seo Jun's mind raced. He had known this was a possibility, but he had pushed it to the back of his thoughts, unwilling to confront the reality that Yuna's mother might come back. He had hoped, naively, foolishly, that she would stay in jail, that the courts would keep her there, that he would never have to face her. But now she was out, and she wanted her daughter back. The thought of Yuna being returned to that woman, to the life of neglect and instability she had escaped, filled him with a cold, protective rage. "I'll handle it," he said, his voice flat. "Stay there. I'm on my way." He drove to the police station himself, his hands steady on the wheel, his mind a whirlwind of calculations. He had legal grounds to fight this. The mother had abandoned her child. She had been arrested for drug possession. She was clearly unfit. But family law was messy, unpredictable. Courts often favored biological parents, even when they were clearly harmful. He couldn't afford to be complacent. He needed to be prepared for every possibility. When he walked into the station, he saw her immediately. Kim Mi-suk was a thin, haggard woman with dark circles under her eyes and a nervous, jittery energy that spoke of withdrawal or desperation or both. She was wearing a worn-out jacket and torn jeans, and her hands were trembling as she clutched a cup of vending machine coffee. She looked older than she was, worn down by years of hardship and bad decisions. She looked up as he approached, her eyes widening as she took in his expensive suit, his polished shoes, his cold, commanding presence. She knew who he was. Someone had told her. "You're the one who took my daughter," she said, her voice sharp and accusing. Sejun stopped a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, his expression carefully blank. "I'm the one who found her," he corrected. "Starving and alone in a back alley. She was waiting for you. You never came." The woman's face crumpled, a flash of guilt crossing her features before she masked it with anger. "That's not my fault. I was arrested. I couldn't come back. I didn't have a choice." "You had a choice," he said coldly. "You chose to abandon her. You chose to leave her in the streets with nothing but a cardboard box for shelter. You don't get to play the victim now." She flinched, but her voice remained defiant. "She's my daughter. I have a right to see her." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous murmur. "You have no rights. You gave up those rights when you left her to starve. She's not going anywhere with you. Not now. Not ever." The woman's eyes filled with tears, but Seo Jun felt no sympathy. He had seen too much, heard too much, to be moved by her desperation. She had had her chance. She had squandered it. "I'll go to court," she threatened. "I'll fight for her. I'll tell them you're just some rich bastard who wants to buy his way into fatherhood. I'll tell them everything." He smiled, a cold, calculated smile that had made grown men tremble in boardrooms. "You do that," he said, "and I'll tell them about the drugs, the arrests, the years of neglect. I'll show them the bruises on her arms, the malnutrition, the fear in her eyes. I'll make sure the whole world knows what you did to her. By the time I'm done, you won't be able to get within 100 feet of any child, let alone her." She stared at him, her face pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. She knew she was beaten. She could feel it, the same way he could feel it in a negotiation when the other side had run out of leverage. She was nothing. He was everything. And she knew it. "You can't keep her forever," she whispered. "She'll grow up. She'll want to know about me. About her real mother." He turned away, his jaw tight. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. For now, you stay away from her. If you try to contact her, if you so much as breathe in her direction, I will make your life a living hell. Do you understand?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. He could see the defeat in her eyes, the resignation, the knowledge that she had lost. He left the station without looking back. That evening, he picked Yuna up from school. She came running out of the building, her backpack bouncing, her face bright with excitement. She had made a friend, a girl named Sujin who liked to draw and had shared her crayons with her at lunch. She chattered nonstop about the classroom, the teacher, the hamster they had in the corner of the room. She was happy. She was safe. And he was determined to keep her that way. But as they drove home, his mind kept drifting back to the woman at the police station. She was broken, desperate, dangerous. He had scared her off, but he knew she wouldn't go quietly. She was a cornered animal, and cornered animals always fought back. He needed a plan. He needed to protect Yuna, legally and emotionally. He had to make sure that woman never came near her again. That night, after Yuna had fallen asleep, he sat in his study and called his lawyers. He told them to prepare for a custody battle. He told them to gather every piece of evidence they could find on Kim Mi-suk's history, the arrests, the evictions, the testimony of anyone who had seen the way she treated her daughter. He was going to bury her in paperwork, in legal precedent, in the weight of his resources. But even as he gave the orders, a part of him wondered if he was doing the right thing. Yuna had asked about her mother a few times, always hesitantly, always with a mixture of hope and fear. He had deflected, changed the subject, told her she would understand when she was older. But he knew he couldn't keep the truth from her forever. One day, she would want to know everything. And when that day came, he would have to tell her. The thought filled him with dread. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following month. Seo-jun spent every spare moment preparing, going over evidence, meeting with his legal team, making sure every detail was perfect. But despite his confidence, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to go wrong, that the system would fail him, that he would fail Yuna. One night, a week before the hearing, Yuna came into his study while he was working. She was wearing her pajamas, her stuffed bunny tucked under her arm, her face flushed with sleep. "Can't sleep?" he asked, setting down his pen. She shook her head, climbing onto his lap without asking. He wrapped his arms around her instinctively, a gesture that had become second nature over the past 2 months. "I had a bad dream," she said quietly. "There was a lady who looked like my mom. She was trying to take me away. I didn't want to go." His heart clenched. He held her tighter, his chin resting on the top of her head. "That's not going to happen," he said. "You're not going anywhere." She was quiet for a moment, then she asked, "Is my mom really bad like the people on TV?" He hesitated. He didn't know how to answer that question. He didn't want to lie to her, but he also didn't want to break her heart. "Your mom is sick," he said carefully. "She has a problem that makes it hard for her to take care of herself, let alone someone else. It doesn't mean she didn't love you. It just means she couldn't be the mother you needed." Yuna processed his words, her small brow furrowed. "Does that mean she won't come back?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But if she does, I'll be here. I won't let anything happen to you." She nodded, accepting his answer with a child's trust. Then she leaned her head against his chest, her eyes fluttering closed. "Sejun SSI," she murmured, "I think you're the best person I've ever known." He felt his eyes sting, a familiar pressure behind his lids that he had learned to recognize over the past few months. He blinked rapidly, refusing to let the tears fall. "I think you're the best person I've ever known too," he whispered as she smiled. A small, sleepy smile. And then she was asleep, her breathing slow and even, her small body warm against his. He sat there for a long time, holding her, feeling the weight of her trust and the weight of his own determination. He would win the custody hearing. He would protect her from her mother, from the system, from everything that had ever hurt her. He would be the father she deserved, even if he had to fight the entire world to do it. And he would never, ever let her go. The custody hearing was held in a nondescript courtroom on a gray Tuesday morning. Seo-jun arrived early, his suit immaculate, his expression unreadable. He had prepared for this moment, like a general preparing for war. His legal team was seated at the table beside him, their faces grim and focused. Across the aisle, Kim Mi-suk sat with a public defender who looked overworked and underpaid. She was wearing a dress that didn't fit, a cheap floral print that made her look even more haggard than she had at the police station. Her eyes were darting around the room, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. She looked like a woman who knew she was going to lose, but was too desperate to give up. The judge entered, a stern-faced woman in her 50s who had seen every kind of family tragedy imaginable. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and began reading through the documents. Seo-jun watched her carefully, searching for any hint of sympathy, any sign of bias. He had done his research on her. She was known for favoring biological parents, for believing that children belonged with their mothers no matter the circumstances. It was a bias that could cost him everything. "Mr. Kong," the judge said, looking up from her papers, "you are seeking full custody of the minor child, Kim Yuna. You are not a relative, and you have known the child for less than 3 months. Can you explain to the court why you believe you are the best person to care for her?" Seo-jun rose, buttoning his jacket. He had prepared a speech, rehearsed it a dozen times in front of his mirror. But now that he was here, standing in front of a woman who held Yuna's future in her hands, he found himself discarding it. The carefully chosen words, the legal arguments, the appeals to logic and precedent, they all felt hollow. What he needed to say was simpler, truer. Your Honor, he began, his voice steady. I have spent my entire life building walls. I told myself they were necessary, that they protected me from being hurt, from being weak, from being vulnerable. I was wrong. They didn't protect me. They isolated me. They made me into a man who couldn't feel anything at all. He paused, his eyes meeting the judge's. And then I met Yuna. She was alone, hungry, and terrified. She had been abandoned by the one person who was supposed to protect her. And when she looked at me, she didn't see a rich man or a powerful man. She saw someone who might help her. That was all she wanted. Just someone to help her. He took a breath, his voice growing quieter. I don't know how to be a father. I don't have any experience. I don't have a manual. But I have something better. I have love. I love that child more than I have ever loved anything in my life. And I will spend the rest of my life learning how to be the parent she deserves. I asked this court to give me that chance. There was a long silence. The judge's expression was unreadable. Then she turned to Kim Mi-suk. And you, Miss Kim, what do you have to say? The woman stood, her hands trembling. She's my daughter, she said, her voice cracking. I gave birth to her. I raised her. I know I made mistakes, but I love her. I'm her mother. She needs me. You abandoned her, the judge said flatly. You left her in a back alley with no food, no shelter, no way to survive. She was found by a stranger. She could have died, Miss Kim. Do you understand that? Kim Mi-suk's face crumpled. I know, she whispered. I know I messed up. But I can change. I want to change. Please, Your Honor, give me another chance. The judge looked at her for a long moment, then down at the papers in front of her. Miss Kim, you have a history of drug abuse, multiple arrests, and a pattern of neglect that spans years. You have no stable income, no stable housing, and no support system. You are not capable of caring for a child, and frankly, you have shown no evidence that you are willing to try. I am denying your request for custody. Kim Mi-suk let out a sob, a raw, gut-wrenching sound that echoed through the courtroom. Seo-jun felt a flicker of pity despite himself. He knew what it was like to lose something you loved, even if you hadn't deserved it. But he pushed the feeling aside. Yuna's safety was more important than this woman's pain. The judge turned to Seo-jun. Mr. Kong, I am granting you temporary full custody of Kim Yuna. There will be a review in 6 months to assess the situation. During that time, I expect you to continue providing her with a stable home, education, and emotional support. If the review goes well, we will discuss making the arrangement permanent. Seo-jun nodded, his heart pounding. Thank you, Your Honor. He left the courtroom with his legal team, but he didn't feel triumphant. He felt heavy, weighed down by the responsibility he had just accepted. He had won the battle, but the war was far from over. He had to prove himself, prove that he was worthy of Yuna's trust. And he had to do it while navigating the minefield of her trauma, her fears, her fragile hope. That evening, he sat on Yuna's bed, telling her what had happened. She listened quietly, her stuffed bunny clutched to her chest, her eyes fixed on his face. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment. So I don't have to go back to my mom, she asked finally. No, he said. You don't. She was quiet again, and then she said, I feel bad for her. She's sad, isn't she? He hesitated, then nodded. Yes, she's sad. But that's not your fault, Yuna. You didn't do anything wrong. She seemed to consider this. Then she said, Can I see her? Not now. Just, someday. He wanted to say no. He wanted to protect her from the disappointment, the pain, the inevitable letdown. But he also knew that was not his choice to make. She was her own person, and she would have to make her own decisions one day. Yes, he said. Someday, when you're ready. She nodded, satisfied, and leaned her head against his shoulder. I'm glad you're my dad, she murmured. He felt his throat tighten. I'm glad too, he said. More than you'll ever know. That night, after he had tucked her in and turned off the light, he stood in the doorway and watched her sleep. She looked peaceful, her face relaxed, her breathing steady. He had done something good. He had saved her from a life of neglect and uncertainty. But he also knew that this was just the beginning. He had to keep saving her, keep protecting her, keep proving that he was worthy of her love. He went to his study and sat down at his desk, staring at the city lights through the window. He thought about his father, about the cold, distant man who had taught him that love was weakness. He thought about the years he had spent trying to be the opposite of that man, only to realize that he had become exactly what he hated. He had built walls to protect himself, but those walls had also trapped him, isolated him from the very things that made life worth living. But now he had Yuna, and she was the key that had unlocked the door. He pulled out a piece of paper and started to write. He wasn't sure what he was writing, or why, but the words came easily, flowing out of him like water from a broken dam. He wrote about his childhood, about his father, about the loneliness and the anger and the fear. He wrote about the moment he had seen Yuna in that back alley, the way her question had cut through all his defenses. He wrote about the love he felt for her, fierce and protective and terrifying in its intensity. When he was done, he folded the letter and put it in his desk drawer. He didn't know who it was for. Maybe Yuna, one day, when she was old enough to understand. Maybe himself, to remind him of what he had been through and what he had become. He closed the drawer and sat back in his chair, feeling a strange sense of peace. He had won the custody hearing, but more than that, he had won something even more important. He had won Yuna's trust, and he would do everything in his power to keep it. The next morning, Yuna was already awake when he came to the kitchen, sitting at the counter with her breakfast, cereal, and milk, her new favorite meal. She was drawing something on a piece of paper, her tongue poking out of the corner of her mouth in concentration. "What's that?" he asked, pouring himself a cup of coffee. She held up the paper with a proud smile. "It's us," she said. "Me and you. And the bunny." He looked at the drawing, a crude stick figure of a man with a square head and a red tie, a smaller stick figure with a pink dress and a huge smile, and a lumpy shape that he assumed was the stuffed bunny. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Can I keep it?" he asked. She nodded, beaming. "It's for you. I made it special." He took the drawing, holding it carefully as if it were made of glass. "I'll frame it," he said. "I'll put it in my office so I can see it every day." Her smile widened, and she went back to her cereal, humming a little tune. He watched her, his heart full, and he realized that this was what it felt like to be happy. Not the fleeting, shallow happiness of a successful deal or a win in the boardroom. The real thing. Deep, lasting, unconditional. He had a long way to go. He still had to figure out how to be a father, how to handle the challenges that lay ahead, how to keep Yuna safe in a world that had already hurt her so much. But for the first time in his life, he felt ready to face those challenges. Not because he had all the answers, but because he had something better. He had a reason to try. 6 months passed. 6 months of school drop-offs and homework help, of bedtime stories and weekend outings, of small victories and occasional setbacks. Yuna had grown taller, her cheeks fuller, her laugh more frequent. She had made friends at school, joined the art club, and even started talking about what she wanted to be when she grew up. A veterinarian, she had decided, because she loved animals and wanted to help them. Seo-jun had watched her transform from a frightened, wary child into a confident, curious girl, and the pride he felt was overwhelming. But the shadows of the past had a way of creeping back when you least expected them. The call came on a Friday evening, just as Seo-jun was helping Yuna with her math homework. She was struggling with fractions, her brow furrowed in concentration, her pencil tapping against the table. He was explaining the concept for the third time, trying to find a way to make it click, when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number, but the area code was familiar. It was the same area code as the police station where he had confronted Kim Mi-suk. He excused himself and stepped into the hallway, his heart already sinking. "Hello, Mr. Kong." The voice on the other end was professional, detached. "This is Officer Lee from the Namdaemun Police Department. I'm calling to inform you that Kim Mi-suk was found dead in her apartment this morning. It appears to be an overdose. We're treating it as a probable suicide." Seo-jun's grip on the phone tightened. He felt the blood drain from his face, a cold wave of shock washing over him. He had known she was struggling. He had seen the desperation in her eyes at the custody hearing. But he had never imagined this. He had never imagined she would give up entirely. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "We're waiting for the coroner's report," Officer Lee said. "But it looks like she left a note. She mentioned her daughter. We thought you should know." A note. She had left a note. For Yuna. The thought made his stomach churn. He didn't know what it said, but he knew it would be devastating. A final message from a mother who had failed in every way that mattered. A plea for forgiveness, or an accusation, or a declaration of love that came too late. Is there anything else? He asked, his voice barely above a whispered, "That's all for now, sir. We'll be in touch if we need anything further." He ended the call and stood in the hallway, his hand pressed against the wall, trying to steady himself. He had thought he was prepared for this. He had known, intellectually, that Kim Mi-suk was a ticking time bomb, a woman who had been self-destructing for years. But the reality of her death was something else entirely. It was a weight that pressed down on his chest, a reminder of how fragile life was, how easily it could slip away. And then there was Yuna. She had asked about her mother a few times over the past months, always cautiously, always with a mix of curiosity and fear. He had answered her questions as honestly as he could, trying to balance the truth with the need to protect her. But he had never told her how bad things really were. He had never told her that her mother was a drug addict, that she had been arrested, that she was spiraling. He had wanted to preserve the image of a mother who had loved her, even if she hadn't been able to care for her. Now he had to tell her that her mother was dead. He had to look into her small, trusting face and shatter the last remaining thread of hope she had been clinging to. He walked back to the kitchen, his legs heavy, his mind racing. Yuna was still staring at her math worksheet, her pencil poised over the page. She looked up as he entered, her expression bright and expectant. "Did you finish your call?" she asked. "Can you help me with the fractions now?" He sat down across from her, his hands resting on the table. He tried to find the words, but they wouldn't come. "How did you tell a child that her mother was gone forever? How did you explain something so final, so irrevocable, Yuna?" he said slowly. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully." She set down her pencil, her smile fading. "What is it?" He reached across the table and took her small hand in his. "Your mother passed away today," he said, his voice gentle but steady. "She died in her sleep. She's not in pain anymore." Yuna stared at him, her eyes wide, her face pale. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then she pulled her hand away and stood up, backing away from the table as if she had been struck. "That's not true," she said, her voice shaking. "You're lying." "I'm not lying," he said, rising to his feet. "I would never lie to you about something like this." Her face crumpled, and she burst into tears, loud, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. She dropped to the floor, her small body shaking, her hands covering her face. He knelt beside her, his arms wrapping around her, but she pushed him away. "Go away," she screamed. "Leave me alone." He sat back, his heart breaking. He wanted to hold her, to comfort her, to take away her pain. But he knew that sometimes, the best thing you could do was give someone space. He stayed where he was, close enough to reach her if she needed him, but far enough to let her process her grief. "I'm here," he said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere." She cried for what felt like hours, her sobs gradually fading into exhausted hiccups. Finally, she looked up at him, her face red and blotchy, her eyes swollen. "Why did she have to die?" she whispered. "She was so sad. I knew she was sad. I could always tell." He reached out and wiped a tear from her cheek. "I don't know why," he said. "Sometimes people are in so much pain that they can't see any other way out. It's not your fault. It was never your fault." She shook her head, more tears streaming down her face. "I should have been there. I should have helped her." "You were a child," he said firmly. "It wasn't your job to help her. It was her job to take care of you, and she failed. That doesn't mean she didn't love you, but it also doesn't mean you have to carry her mistakes." She was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the floor. Then she looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Are you going to die too?" she asked, her voice small and terrified. He shook his head, pulling her into a tight embrace. "No," he said. "I'm going to live for a very long time. I'm going to be here for you, no matter what. I promise." She clung to him, her small arms wrapped around his neck, her face buried in his chest. He held her, rocking her gently, murmuring words of comfort that he hoped would make a difference. He didn't know if they would. He didn't know if anything would ever make this right. Later that night, after she had finally cried herself to sleep, he sat in his study, staring at the letter he had written months ago. He had been saving it for a special occasion, but now it felt more urgent than ever. He pulled it out of the drawer and read it again, his eyes scanning the words he had written in a moment of raw, unguarded honesty. He thought about Yuna, about the pain she was carrying, about the years of healing that lay ahead. He thought about the mother who had died alone, unloved and unloving. He thought about the father he had been, the cold, distant man who had pushed everyone away. And he realized that he had been given a second chance, not just to be a father to Yuna, but to be a better man. He took out a fresh piece of paper and began to write again. This time, he wrote to Yuna directly, telling her everything he had never been able to say aloud. He wrote about his own childhood, about the loneliness and the fear, about the walls he had built. He wrote about the day she had asked if she could stay, and how that moment had changed everything. He wrote about his love for her, fierce and unconditional, and his determination to always be there for her. When he was finished, he folded the letter and placed it in an envelope. He wrote her name on the front and put it in his desk drawer, next to the first letter he had written. They would be hers one day, when she was ready. For now, they were his words to hold on to. He went to her room and stood in the doorway, watching her sleep. She was curled on her side, her hand clutching the stuffed bunny, her face peaceful despite the tears that still lingered on her cheeks. He felt a wave of love so powerful that it almost brought him to his knees. "Yuna," he whispered, "I promise you, I will never leave you. I will never let you feel alone again." He closed the door and went back to his study, but he didn't sit down. He stood at the window, looking out at the city lights, and he let himself feel the grief, the hope, the fear, the love. All of it. He was no longer the cold, detached man who had built walls around his heart. He was something else now, something softer, something stronger. And he was ready for whatever came next. The final hearing was held on a crisp autumn morning, the leaves outside the courthouse windows a blaze of gold and red. Seo Jun sat at the table with his legal team, his hands clasped in front of him, his expression calm. Across the aisle, the seat that had once held Kim Mi-suk was empty. She had been gone for 3 months now, her absence a quiet, permanent presence in the room. The judge, the same stern woman who had presided over the custody hearing, looked down at the papers in front of her and then up at Seo Jun. "Mr. Kong," she said, "the court has reviewed the progress of your guardianship over the past 6 months. We have spoken with the child's teachers, her psychologist, and the social worker assigned to her case. All reports are overwhelmingly positive. She is thriving academically, socially, and emotionally. You have provided her with a stable home, a consistent routine, and the emotional support she needed to heal." She paused, her gaze steady. "Based on the evidence before me, I am granting you full, permanent custody of Kim Yuna. You are now her legal father, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails." Seo Jun felt a wave of relief wash over him, so powerful that it nearly knocked him off his chair. He had been prepared for this, had known it was likely, but the finality of the judge's words still hit him like a physical blow. He was her father. Legally, officially, irrevocably. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion churning inside him. The judge nodded, then turned to Yuna, who was sitting beside Mr. Park in the front row. She had asked to come to the hearing, had insisted that she wanted to be there when it happened. She was wearing her school uniform, her hair neatly braided, her stuffed bunny tucked under her arm. She looked small and serious, but there was a light in her eyes that hadn't been there 6 months ago. "Yuna," the judge said, her voice softening. "Do you understand what just happened?" "Yes, Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and steady. "He's my dad now. For real." The judge smiled, a rare and unexpected expression that transformed her stern face. "Yes," she said, "for real." As they left the courthouse, Yuna took Seo Jun's hand and squeezed it tightly. He looked down at her, at the small, brave girl who had asked if she could stay, and he felt his heart swell with a love so vast that it seemed to fill every corner of his being. "Can we get ice cream?" she asked, her voice hopeful. He laughed, a genuine, unguarded laugh that he had never thought himself capable of. "Anything you want," he said. "Today, you can have anything you want." They went to a small ice cream parlor near the courthouse, a modest place with worn-out tables and a chalkboard menu. Yuna ordered a massive sundae with every topping imaginable, and Seo Jun watched her eat it with the same fierce enthusiasm she had shown on their first day together. She was happy, she was safe, and she was his. That evening, he sat on her bed, reading her a bedtime story. She was curled up under her covers, her stuffed bunny tucked under her arm, her eyes half closed. He had just finished the last page when she reached out and touched his hand. Seojun SSI, she said softly. Yes, I want to tell you something. He closed the book and set it aside, giving her his full attention. What is it? She was quiet for a moment, her small fingers tracing patterns on his palm. Then she said, when I was little, I used to think that no one would ever want me, that I was just a burden, something people had to put up with. My mother always made me feel like I was too much, like I was a mistake. She paused, her voice growing even softer. But you made me feel like I was enough, like I was important, like I was wanted. He felt his throat tighten, the familiar pressure behind his eyes. You are wanted, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You are the most wanted person in the entire world. She smiled, a small, sleepy smile, and closed her eyes. I know, she murmured. That's why I love you. He sat there for a long time after she had fallen asleep, watching her breathe, feeling the weight of her words settle into his heart. She loved him. The thought was both terrifying and wondrous, a gift he had never expected and didn't quite know how to accept. He went to his study and opened the desk drawer, pulling out the 2 letters he had written. He read them both, his eyes scanning the words he had poured onto the page in moments of raw, unguarded honesty. Then he took out a fresh piece of paper and began to write a third that he wrote about the future, the life they would build together, the challenges they would face, the joy they would share. He wrote about his love for her, a love that had grown stronger with each passing day, a love that had transformed him into someone he had never thought he could be. He wrote about the promises he had made and the promises he intended to keep. When he was finished, he folded the letter and placed it in an envelope. He wrote her name on the front and added it to the drawer, next to the others. They would be hers one day, when she was ready to read them. For now, they were his words, his heart, his hope. He walked to the window and looked out at the city, the lights glittering like stars against the dark sky. He thought about the boy he had been, the boy locked in the garden shed, the boy who had learned to build walls around his heart. He thought about the man he had become, the cold, distant man who had believed that love was weakness. And he thought about the father he was now, the man who had learned that love was the greatest strength of all. He turned from the window and walked back to Yuna's room, pausing in the doorway. She was still asleep, her face peaceful, her small hand clutching the stuffed bunny. He watched her for a long moment, his heart full to bursting. Good night, my darling, he whispered. I'll see you in the morning. And he meant it, every single word.